There are a lot of great games, and there are a lot of great games that play excellently at two players. But today on the Cardboard Herald, we're taking a look at my top 10 games that are exclusively two players. Starting it out, we are taking a look at Skulk Hollow, the beautifully asymmetric game inspired by Shadow of the Colossus, one of the most iconic and beloved video games of all time, where one player is taking on a totemic force of nature, a hulking beast of a meeple that is moving around the map and has their own respective persona on the side of the board that the other player, being the little fox and heroes, can send units amongst the map and then eventually climb on to the beast itself, represented by that side board. There's a lot of variety from game to game in that the Foxens have different leader units that they can play with, and then the elemental forces of nature, well, there's 4 in the box and each of them have a different victory condition. They play differently, and it adds this fantastic cinematic element to the game, this struggle for survival in this head-to-head contention. It's accessible, it's exciting, it plays quickly, and it is fun. Number 9 is No Spring Chicken, and it's a re-implementation of an even older game, Zeus and Hera, and that is Thunder and Lightning, a game of head-to-head deceit and subterfuge and battle between Loki and Thor. It's a game where you array units in columns in front of you, and each player can make challenges amongst those columns, but the problem is, for both players, is that those units are hidden at first until they make challenges. So, doing challenges reveals some of your own information, but also reveals some of your opponents, and there's a whole array of trickery that you can do amongst the cards in your hands, manipulating the columns, manipulating the other player's hands, and manipulating the units on the battlefield. And really, it's one of these games where you're trying to force your opponent into certain positions, ultimately into their submission. It's puzzly, it's deceptive, it's speculative, and it looks fantastic on the table. It is easily one of the best head-to-head card games out there. Number 8 is a game that comes up often on these lists for good reasons. That is Targi, or Targi. I honestly have never found out how to pronounce the name of the game, but nonetheless, it's just a beautiful and refined game, a Euro gem that has you drifting along the desert. It's one where every bit of the ecosystem, and I don't mean the thematic ecosystem in a Dune sense, I mean the ecosystem of choices and decisions that you make, feeds into one another, and everything that your opponent is doing will have impacts on your own game too. It's a different sort of head-to-head than the types of games that I've listed so far, but it's a game that shows that if you design around a specific player count, sometimes less can be more. Number 7 is getting back to battle mode, and no, not all of these are going to be vicious brawlers, but we are looking at Cthulhu Wars Duel, the first game on this list that has Duel in its title, as has been made oh so popular by a certain game that may come up later on this list. But Cthulhu Wars Duel is, of course, the 2-player reimagining of the epic Cthulhu Wars. It strips it down into its barest bones. It has had 2 releases at this point, which can be commingled, but each game, Cthulhu Wars Duel and Duel Extinction, are packaged with 2 respective great old ones that play dramatically different in this area control game of cultish oppression on an ancient version of our world, or another dimension that may also be the case there. It's contemplative, it's smart, and it's one of those games that shows that area control designed for 2 players doesn't have to be a stripped down version. Cthulhu Wars Duel is the real deal. Number 6 is one of the best tactical miniatures games out there without any miniatures whatsoever. It is Summoner Wars 2nd Edition, the triumphant return by Plaid Hat with their flagship title. It is a beautifully crafted 2-player tactical game in which each player has an asymmetric deck, and unlike traditional card games, you put them into spaces on a board, manipulate them around, create cover for yourself, and try to press on your opponent in order to win the game. defeating their summoner. This new release has a brilliant art style that I'm absolutely a fan of, that gives it a more cartoony vibe that kind of takes away some of the self-serious notion of the original Summoner Wars, and it feels tighter and more focused than Summoner Wars has ever been in the past. I love that Colby Dowk and his team have really reimagined this game from the ground up and come out with such a stellar package that now contains one of the best head-to-head games out there. Number 5 is Patchwork. How could this not be on the list? This is Uwe Rosenberg's iconic game that made a huge splash and introduced to the larger gaming world these spatial arranging concepts that have been cemented into their own genre or used as a additive mechanic in other games, including Uwe Rosenberg's other games like Feast for Odin. But Patchwork still remains one of the absolute best. It is absolutely one of my favorite Uwe Rosenberg games, which is really saying something given the creator's vast array of iconic titles. It is one of the most brilliant moments of simplicity that you'll see in a game, where you array all of the tiles around the central board and you go, aha! Of course, this is so simple and so elegant and so refined, and yet so puzzly and ingenious, and in some ways insidious, as you have to make some of the toughest decisions you've made in your gaming life on how to assemble your nice fluffy patchwork quilt. Which brings me to number 4, Duelosaur Island, the second game on this list to have duel in the title, and honestly my favorite Isaur Island that's out there. I think Duelosaur Island is such a beautiful distillation of the original Dinosaur Island. It has all of the extreme 90s aesthetic baked into it. It has the wonderful playground of genetic manipulation in order to create your dinosaurs, and it implements an I split you choose system with the dice drafting that is so ingenious and feels so good and is the cornerstone of the entire game. I mean, yeah, the dice themselves are really cool, but that system where one player rolls the dice and then assigns them to the various bonuses, which change from game to game, creating a lot of variation and variety, and then the other player gets first pick to choose from among those, is just so brilliant and so succinct and creates such a level of suspense. Has a great theme, has a great look, plays way faster than the original, which was one of my complaints about Dinosaur Island in the first place. Duelosaur Island is absolutely a game that I keep in my collection, and Dinosaur Island can't say the same. Number 3 is a game all about camels and I guess various goods, but we all know it's all about the camels, and that is Jaipur, one of the OGs of excellent 2-player card games, a marketplace economic game where players are trying to nab as much as they can from the central market area in order to make certain sales, and if you make those sales, you're going to drain these stacks of coinage associated with the specific goods that you sell. The thing is that if you sell in bulk, you get extra bonuses, but if you sell early, then you get the most valuable versions of those gold tokens from people most wanting those items from the market. So it's one of these games where you can do only like 4 things on your turn, but every turn feels critical and intense, and what you take from the table or exchange from the marketplace at the table is leaving opportunities for your opponent. And so much of this game is just as much about denial to your opponent as it is what you are presenting opportunities for yourself. Number 2 is the newest game on this list, and it is so good that it was nearly in contention for number 1 that I think just barely ekes out. So we'll get to number 1 in a little bit, but Caper Europe is a new game by Keymaster Games where it has this wonderful 60s caper theme that may feel familiar for kids of the 90s and 80s like me who grew up with Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, where You are placing your various hoodlums who are conducting this heist into these different zones in famous European cities, and you're manipulating essentially different sections of tug-of-war as you put out these thieves and the corresponding goods that may have immediate effects or may play into endgame effects that are going to net you more points as you play. Are you going for the overall heist, the score at the end of the game, who controls that bank and gets to do the ultimate robbery? Or as you are scoping it out, do you take little artifacts from it here or there for a little set collection game? It's one of these games where you always want to do more than you can, so you have to make really tight choices about what you do, and it plays incredibly fast. A huge part of the charm is the visual aesthetic, which is unparalleled in this thematic zone. And you have 4 different real-world cities that integrate into the thief deck, into the items deck, and into the locations deck to give its own flavor, whether you're playing in Paris or Barcelona. It is such a breath of fresh air and such a wonderful reimagining of what 2-player drafting could be, which was iconically initially imagined in my mind by our #1 game, so we might as well get to it. 7 Wonders Duel. The iconic 2-player distillation of 7 Wonders, which, like Duelosaur Island, I think is a better version of the original game. I have moved on from 7 Wonders after playing it a gajillion times, but I've played this game a gajillion and a half times and still have not gotten over just how brilliant it is. The theme comes to life, the drafting where you are taking cards from the table and revealing new information, and that information could be the cards that you desperately want, and so you're carefully drafting around what opportunities you're presenting your opponents. The tight economy with money exchanging back and forth between players, and the sort of 3-way tug-of-war that's a completely different 3-way tug-of-war than Caper Europe implements, where you have the ultimate race to the end of the game with points, or trying to cut your opponent off and immediately win the game by getting enough science or enough push on the military track. It gives you so much to consider and be cognizant of as you are drafting every single card, but it is incredibly, indelibly accessible and understandable as soon as you start playing the game. It is one of my favorite games of all time, and it is easily my favorite 2-player game. And that is our list. But I want to hear from you. What are your favorite 2-player only games? What did I miss? And what games on this list did not work for you? And which of them are some of your own favorites? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, thank you for supporting. Thank you for watching. Thanks for being awesome. I've been Jack for the Cardboard Herald.